Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the January meeting of the Strategic Growth Council. It's a new and exciting venue here. I'm not entirely sure what I think of it, but I really like the annex over here on the left. Apparently there'll be a little tug of war or rugby match later between the two sides. Okay, so...
6 against 3, that's about right.
No, they got 5. They got more in the back. Okay, so thanks for coming. We have a challenging agenda today to get through, so we'll dive right into it, although I do want to make my own official welcome to Gail. I wasn't here at the last meeting when she arrived, but it's a pleasure to have you and look forward to serving with you. All right. Always the highlight of the meeting, item number 2, approval of the SGC meeting minutes from the last meeting. Mr. Laird.
It's tragic whenever you sink to having to talk about the minutes. But before I move them, which I will do in a second, this was close to a transcription of the comments that every single board member made, and it made them very long. And we have a webcast that anybody can access that would give the precise comments, and I think the minutes need to be just a brief description of the subject matters, and there's no need for 8 or 10 pages and to go into that detail. So I would just suggest that. But having suggested that, I would move we approve the minutes.
We have a motion. Any second?
Second.
Second. Discussion? All in favor?
If I could.
Yes.
Just on page 24, just to let you know that I read these. There's a quotation from me where it says, I'd be concerned about satisfied, especially for rural projects. The word that was used there was a set-aside, not satisfied, and so I'd like to have that modified. Though I like people to be satisfied, but the concern that we were discussing at that time was set-aside for various geographic regions of the state.
I am satisfied with the change to set aside, and I would take that into the motion.
Okay. With that, all in favor of the motion, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we have minutes. All right. Next, any information and updates from council members? Wow, people are ready to get into these guidelines. All right.
Well, if nobody else wants to
Secretary
speak,
Rodriguez.
There you go. Well, actually, I just wanted to briefly address 2 things. One, just to update members of the council on the meeting that occurred of the UNFCCC in Lima in December. And the point I wanted to make is you frequently hear questions about why California seems to be going it alone sometimes on climate change issues. And the message I wanted to take back from Lima was that, in fact, many jurisdictions, both at the national and subnational level, are really interested in doing something substantive on climate change. And indeed, they're interested in working with California. While we were in Lima, we attended joint events with China, with Mexico. We attended events that were sponsored by a number of subnational governments. And I appeared so frequently at events with representatives from Quebec and Ontario and British Columbia that there was a suggestion that perhaps California should become the 11th Canadian province. So I just want to say that it would have been nice if the national governments and the UN had been able to do a bit more, perhaps, at Lima. But I was impressed by the dialogue, and most importantly, for purposes of California and California's interests, I just want people to know that there's a great deal of interest in California's programs, and there are many government entities that are interested in working with California on climate change issues. I don't know if you'd have anything to add to that, Ken, since you were in Lima as well.
So I did have the opportunity to join Secretary Rodriguez on behalf of the California delegation and Governor Brown. And in addition to echoing the Secretary's comments, I wanted to note that among the initiatives that California is pursuing and talked a lot about in Lima and is now pursuing further are two international efforts, one around zero-emission vehicles, in which we're seeking to form a consortium of places around the world, primarily California and a number of nations, to ensure that there continues to be a growing market around the world, not just in California, for zero-emission vehicles. And that is something that we found a lot of support for. In addition, and very briefly, we're also spearheading, along with a state in Germany called Baden-Württemberg, an agreement among subnationals, as Secretary Rodriguez mentioned. Subnationals, even though California is now the 7th largest economy in the world, we do not have a seat at the table with the 194 nations that are deciding the world's future around climate. So in order to change that dynamic a bit, California and Baden-Württemberg and some others are seeking to put together a joint agreement among subnationals around the world that support more aggressive climate action. And that also resonated quite a bit with folks in Lima, and we will be continuing that process. So, Secretary Laird.
Just very briefly, because we do have a packed agenda. The action that was taken in many ways on water last year is moving to implementation now. So with the $7.5 billion bond, the governor has recommended in his budget getting $535 million out the door in the next year, but there's an additional $2.7 billion that was earmarked for storage, and the process that is established by the bond that empowers the Water Commission is beginning this week and should take as long as 2 years to be ready to receive any project that anybody has that might qualify for the bond. Additionally, the budget contained $1.1 billion of former flood control bonds to get that last money ready to go out the door. It's been going out incrementally since 2006 when the bond was adopted. And then there was the support in the budget to start the process to implement the groundwater law. So all that is moving this year. Last year, in many ways, was the action. This year is the implementation. The one thing I would say to the people in the room is that the bond specifies that there be workshops and meetings around the state on the different pieces. People are talking about making that as easy as possible so you don't have to do too many, but there is a required place so that the public will have a chance to hear what's going on and make comments. Although unique compared to past bonds, this really specifies processes and really deals with them on merit rather than earmarks for specific projects. So all that process is beginning in this year, and stay tuned.
Bob.
Secretary Laird, I'm glad you brought up the water bond. I spent some time with a couple of your colleagues in the finance part of your organization. I think it would be very useful for the Growth Council to get briefed on the water bond and how, so we could really understand how the ideals of this council are finding their way into the various aspects of the bond. And I think there are lots of different ways for that to happen, but I think that would be a good topic in the future.
We'd be ready to do whatever the council wants.
Secretary Rodriguez.
Well, the second thing I wanted to touch on briefly concerns the budget that was just introduced by the governor. And it sort of frames the discussion that will go on this afternoon. And I just wanted to remind people that there is $1 billion that in cap and trade funding that is provided for in the budget. I suspect the executive director will allude to this in his report, but $200 million of that will be set aside for the Strategic Growth Council as part of the continuing appropriation to the Strategic Growth Council for its programs. The significance of that is that it reminds people that this is an ongoing program, that there will be future grant programs that will be developed to implement the cap and trade program and the spending program. There will also be a new investment plan that will be worked on this year that will establish the framework for future expenditures in future fiscal years. For this fiscal year, we're going to be using essentially the same framework that we have for expenditures for this year. But as part of the discussion of the implementation plan and the investment plan in future fiscal years, we'll have an opportunity to look again at the suite of programs that are available to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the state, and look at whether there are areas where we want to think about new programs or whether existing programs should be included. So I just wanted to mention that this is an ongoing process, that we will continue to look at where we can make expenditures in the future. Also, there's been some question about whether somehow we should have recommended more than $1 billion in expenditures. It's just too early to tell how much money will come into the cap and trade program in the next year. Frankly, we need to bring in $348 million in the next two auctions in order to have enough funding for this fiscal year. So this is very much something that we are monitoring. We're looking at what will come in future auctions. As many of you may know, fuels and allowances for fuels will be part of auctions in this calendar year. We'll have to see what impact that has on revenues. So there are many variables at work right now, and we'll keep an eye on that as time goes on. But I just wanted to sort of provide that as context for this afternoon's discussion. And now I'll be quiet.
We'll see. Any other council comments? All right, let me do one housekeeping thing. If people wish to speak on an item, where are they bringing it?
I was going to slip a note over, but that's not going to happen. So public comment cards are on their way, and staff will be distributing through the aisles. And then, so if you could bring them forward up to Kim. Wave your hand, Kim. Kim. When we do get the forms, then we'll have that available. So.
Should get the forms by the end of the meeting.
My every whim is anticipated. All right. Okay, so let's move to item 4, Mike McCoy's executive report. Mike, you're on.
Thank you, and thanks very much to everyone for being here today. I will, in the continuing tradition started a few meetings back, be very brief with the report, hit a few highlights, and recommend that for further information you take a look in your packets for the full executive report. First of all, I'd like to welcome a new key staff member to the Strategic Growth Council. Sandy Spalisi is an attorney with over 30 years of experience in policy and government and in philanthropic and foundation work. Her areas of expertise include sustainable development, climate change, land use policy, water policy, CEQA, air quality, and renewable energy. And on all of these counts, we're very glad to have Sandy joining us. Her special responsibility will be to support Bob Fisher on several of the initiatives that he has expressed great interest in his term on the council, including infill, schools, water issues, and several others. We're very grateful for the philanthropic resources that have made this possible, and would ask you to join us in welcoming Sandy. In addition, we have a new member who is not here with us today. His appointment is quite recent, and he had prior commitments that were inescapable. It is Manuel Pastor. He's a professor at USC. I don't think he needs much introduction to anyone in this room. He's a well-known scholar and public speaker in social, political, and economic thought, and I'm very excited. I'm sure you're all very excited to have him joining us. He will attend our next meeting.
He's a member of the Parks Forward Commission, and that's just winding down, so it was perfect timing.
Excellent. And as Secretary Rodriguez mentioned, the governor's 2015-16 budget proposes $200 million to be available for the affordable housing, sustainable communities, and sustainable agricultural land conservation programs. We really are excited about this. Among other things, it suggests that our experience in this first year will guide our work next year, and we'll be prepared to make whatever improvements are necessary from the lessons we now learn at a slightly smaller scale, hopefully moving ourselves to a larger scale in the coming years. I think there'll be more about that in our April meeting when we have a better sense of where the auctions are headed and what kind of results have been produced this year in terms of who the applicants really are going to be. And we will give you a list of that at your April meeting, so we'll be able to begin talking about the future even as we continue to advance the present. Finally, everyone's favorite topic, urban footprint. Well, it's taken longer than expected to extend the use of the model beyond the 3 large MPOs that are using it today. The expansion is at hand. UC Davis Urban Land Use and Transportation Center will begin teaching courses on the model for other MPO planners and city planners by the end of this month. And then in March, the University of California, Davis Extension Program will begin public training on the model, including land use and transportation consulting firms. That will begin on March 24th. So your investment is about to enter its next phase of enlisting a broader group of users, and we expect continuous improvement in the program as a result. And that's all I have for this meeting. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Yes, Secretary Caballero.
Mike, I don't have a question. Thank you for the report. It's very well done, and I appreciate the detail that's in it. It goes back to a comment that I made the last meeting, and I'm not sure this is the appropriate agenda item, but it kind of fits, which is strategic planning. To the extent that the strategic plan that was adopted a number of years ago ended this year, and we've received resources that were not anticipated when the Strategic Growth Council was first begun. I think it's real important for us to be talking about where do we think we're going to go and how are we going to get there. And so I just want to kind of keep it up on the radar screen.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. You and I have discussed that, and it is an important point. I think in the excitement of everything else going on today, I missed that. We do want to begin that process with you all because obviously our circumstances have changed and the needs of our state have changed, and we should remain relevant to both of those subjects. We have a new staff member who we introduced a couple of meetings back who has substantial experience in strategic planning, Mackenzie Weiser, and we will be organizing around that subject, and hopefully we'll bring some preliminary ideas about how to proceed at our April meeting. Thank you very much for reminding me of that.
Okay, so we're on to item 5. So looks like Brian Annis and company. Overview of the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program and the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program. Brian.
Right. And we do have a PowerPoint, if that's available. Well, good afternoon. I'm Brian Annis, the Undersecretary at the Transportation Agency, and I'm joined by Bruce Roberts, who's the Acting Chief for Caltrans Division of Rail and Mass Transit, and we're happy to be here this afternoon to talk to you about two of the programs funded from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund here that they're both transit and rail programs. The two programs, I think, like the Affordable Housing Sustainable Community Program, they suffer from an awkward acronym. So we're going to suggest a shorthand here. The first program, Low Carbon Transit Operations Program, sometimes called LC-TOP, but we're going to suggest we refer to it here as Transit Ops Program or Transit Operations Program. Second one, Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, TRCPA. We're going to suggest Transit and Capital Program here. These programs in the last governor's budget that was implemented fund each program at $25 million in the current year, and they're continuously appropriated programs. And with the numbers included in the governor's budget, the Transit Ops Program would receive $50 million in 15-16, which is 5% of ongoing cap and trade revenues. And the Transit Capital Program would receive $100 million, which is 10% of ongoing proceeds. We do, of course, recognize the larger context of these two programs. The transit programs are part of a larger effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through integrated quality transit, affordable housing, and sustainable communities. And the bar chart here lists those four continuously appropriated programs. We've put affordable housing, sustainable communities at the top. And one way I've heard that program described as kind of your first mile, last mile program to work around transit stations with affordable housing, active transportation, other amenities that will help grow those areas, and through those programs grow transit ridership. The bottom of the bar chart, we have high-speed rail, the high-speed backbone of transit in California connecting all the major regions. And then we've put the two transit programs in the middle, the Transit Capital Program in blue. We hope that can be a bit of a linkage between the top and the bottom. Perhaps your mile 5 or mile 50 transportation getting you in between the first mile, last mile, and the high-speed spine of mass transportation. And then the Transit Operations Program, that's a program that can help those operators run the new service that are funded through any of the other programs. Pay the drivers, pay the fuel, operate the new infrastructure they might need for electrical charging and so forth. These programs have several items in common. Of course, both targeted around greenhouse gas reduction through growing transit ridership and reducing car vehicle miles traveled, and by funding zero-emission and low-emission transit vehicles. They both have requirements to serve disadvantaged communities. On the operations program, the requirement is that a minimum of 50% of the funds benefit disadvantaged communities for applicable transit agencies. And what that means is if a transit agency has one of those Cal EnviroScreen disadvantaged communities within its service area, then 50% of their funding through the program would have to go to those disadvantaged communities. The capital program has a minimum of 25% benefit to disadvantaged communities. I'm going to pass it over to Bruce Roberts for the next 3 slides that focus on the Transit Operations Program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And as Brian said, the Transit Operations Program is one of these elements. It's a formulaic approach. It will follow very much based on a percent of funds distributed through the STA yearly allocation that all transit, that the about 170 transit operators within the state receive. So it would be their formula based upon their July allocation applied to the funds that are available through the proceeds. The approach will then make every transit operator that receives STA funding eligible for this program, and from that program they will come forward to the department saying, we hereby request an application of funds with how we intend to use it. Department of Transportation will look at that, evaluate, submit that listing of we'll do a first identification, a first look at it, submit that list for approval through ARB, and finally it'd be distributed through the state controller's office to all these agencies. Oh, did I just hit it off? Okay. The type of programs that it will fund is very broad-based, but it is, as Brian said, it's intended to reduce carbon emissions and also then achieve the disadvantaged communities aspect. It can be everything from buses for expanded service. It could be the type from operations improvements, could be mechanics to support new equipment, everything to even fuels, as long as they're showing those type of benefits. And finally, this is a program we are putting into place now, and it's will be allocated. We are, even next month, we will be receiving the first set of applications from operators. We will then be evaluating and then distributing a first round in March, with a second distribution for the year planned for end of June. And then it would be then on a yearly basis after that, based upon a continuous appropriation, where once it's in a continuous appropriation, an operator could choose to pass, but then they could also then say, yes, we want this on every year. So so the money would not go away from that operator once it's continuously appropriated. But in essence, if their funding was not to a level that allowed them to achieve what they were trying to, they could pass on year one, ask for the money year two, and then actually have a pooled fund as we move forward. But an exciting program that does complement many of the efforts that are done here within this council.
The Transit Capital Program, this is the contrast slides, a little different from the Transit Ops Program Bruce just talked about. The Transit Capital Program is a competitive program to fund a small number of transformational projects that improve the statewide network. We have primary evaluation criteria listed in the draft guidelines: emission reduction, ridership growth, achievement of integrated service and safety benefits. We also have some secondary criteria which would also be part of the scoring and evaluation, such as the co-benefits of the broader sustainable community goals, such as health benefits, infill development, those type of goals, and of course disadvantaged community benefits. The types of projects that the Transit Capital Program might fund: integrated ticketing is something that can be a lower cost project, but in having two different rail providers or transit providers allow the same fare payment option, same ticket, that reduces the transaction cost of people that might need several transfers to get where they're going. We also have the ability to fund reliability and enhancement type projects that could include things like electrical service, solar around transit stations, different things that will improve service reliability as another way to grow service. So things may not necessarily, to grow ridership, we may not necessarily need to add a bus, and sometimes better reliability of the service will bring riders. We also, through this program, envision funding major new capital, and we have that split into two types: a new rail construction, so things that might link an existing transit system to the high-speed rail network or to another intercity rail service. Also, major new capital, electric buses and rail cars. This program is still in the guideline development phase. Guidelines were posted December 19th. We actually have some of our key staff today down in Los Angeles at a public workshop. And tomorrow at 10 a.m. to noon, we have a second workshop here in the Capitol, in the State Capitol building, 4th floor, room 447. So certainly if anyone is here today, wants to delve into a more detailed discussion, we hope you can join us tomorrow at that workshop. We're anticipating adoption of final guidelines on February 6th, looking for project applications by April 10th, and finally hope to select and publish projects by June 30th. So that concludes this, this quick overview, and we're certainly happy to answer questions or receive any feedback.
Okay, questions or feedback? Mr. Fisher.
Brian and Bruce, thank you. That was really clear, and I think the overall context of how these programs fit together was very helpful to see. Can you talk a little bit about how you worked with to integrate these programs with efforts that the Growth Council is doing, most notably the affordable housing program that we're going to talk about today, and maybe who you included as you developed the draft guidelines?
Sure. And we did benefit from participation in the guideline development from Strategic Growth Council staff, Air Resource Board staff as well. We do, as I mentioned on the competitive program, we do look for these co-benefits of infill development and housing and things like that as one of the things to consider. And on the formulaic program, realize under the structure of that program, we're not going to see multiple projects. We'll probably just see one project from each operator, but we do have language in the guidelines to encourage that those type of factors be considered through the local public process, and in some cases have reporting back to the state so we know what kind of benefits are being achieved through those programs.
I mean, it just seems to me unnatural that as, you know, to tie the transit projects together with where the affordable housing grants go. Now, those won't happen now for 6 months out of this council, but if there was a way to tie these things together more, I think we'd be achieving the kinds of benefits that this council would like to see.
Secretary Rodriguez.
Just a question about the active transportation segment of the transit operations program. One of the concerns I've heard about the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program that we've got before us today is that it may not provide funding for active transportation programs that are not associated with a capital project. Bike lanes, for example, in a urbanized area. Would the funding in the transit operations program be available for that kind of project? Or are there other programs that the transportation agency that might provide funding for that kind of program?
Well, we do, in the guidelines for the transit operations program, we focus on some projects in the active transportation area that would grow transit ridership. So things like a rack on the front of a bus, bike parking at a transit station, bike sharing services that might be centered around transit stops, things like that we think can improve active transportation in a way that has that co-benefit of growing transit ridership as well. And of course, we also have the active transportation program that was established in law in 2012 and implemented last year. That is a competitive grant program for active transportation projects of a broader spectrum that does include as well ability to fund safe routes to transit, but also safe routes to schools and other walking and biking projects.
Matt, just to add to that, the active transportation program was the consolidation of a lot of small bicycle, mostly bike-focused programs over the years that got sort of ancillary focus of investment in California. We put those together and then concentrated more federal money on active transportation programs. The first round is a 2-year program, about $350 million to invest in those types of projects. About half the money is chosen by regions through a regional choice program, and the other half has gone through a competitive process at the state level. So I just mentioned that because that's a wide and significant place where these kind of projects are funded.
Obviously, they're earth-shaking programs that we're working on. So, thank you. Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Secretary Dooley.
No, I would just say that vibration, we used to meet here for Covered California, and it happens relatively routinely. I never got an explanation for what it was, but we learned to ignore it. So.
Oh, my gosh.
Where's the helicopter?
Okay. Thank you.
It's very weird. All right.
Thank you for that, Diana, because having the Seismic Safety Commission is I was going to jump under the table and then, started, so.
4.4 Greenfield this morning.
Okay, moving right along. Item number 6 is the program guidelines for sustainable agricultural lands program funds. All these things have acronyms, but we're not going to use them because Governor Brown will give me a long lecture about acronyms. So, Julie, over to you.
Good afternoon. I was hoping maybe that vibration was just tractors rolling in support of the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program. So my name's Julie Alvis. I'm Deputy Assistant Secretary at Natural Resources Agency.
And John Lowry, I'm Assistant Director of the Division of Land Resource Protection at the Department of Conservation.
And we're here today to talk about item 6, which is an action item to approve the guidelines, program guidelines for this fiscal year for the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program. And included in, as part of the staff report and in your binder, or 3 attachments, the guidelines, a revision summary of what the changes that took place between the draft version of the guidelines and the final guidelines that are before you today, and a compilation of comments received from the 3 workshops and through letters provided by our public comment period, October 31st.
Okay, just as a brief reminder, the program that we've developed and are proposing for implementation is made up of 3 primary components. An initial component that would provide small amounts of funding for primarily cities and counties in cooperation with partners to do a little bit of planning, to develop thoughtful strategies that are more protective of critical agricultural land resources within their community, within their jurisdictions. The second component of the program focuses on the acquisition of agricultural conservation easements, critically located and that are protective of those most valuable resources identified by communities. The third component of the program, and this component is not a part of the current guidelines, we will be developing it over the next year or so, will really focus attention on providing financial incentives to assist with on-farm conservation practices that really get at the root of greenhouse gas emissions and improve the ability for open spaces that are being used for agriculture to sequester carbon, particularly soil carbon, but also carbon within vegetation. What are we looking at here? Okay, a couple of major components of the program that we need to be very thoughtful of. Permanent protection of farm and range lands through investments in planning and agricultural conservation easements that will result in measurable greenhouse gas reductions. And that will be done through a combination of both avoidance of increases as well as carbon sequestration, and then when the third component of the program comes on, direct greenhouse gas emission reductions by altering management practices. In addition to that, we are very hopeful and confident that an extraordinary number of co-benefits will be generated as a result of implementation of these project activities. Many of them are listed there. The list is actually much longer than that, much more comprehensive. Sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words. So I just want to point out several examples, no, a few examples, of where we have progressive, thoughtful communities that have developed strategies that accommodate both growth and agricultural land protection. The city of Davis, the city of Novato, and you can see there that both the use of agricultural conservation easements as well as other easements have provided a very effective area of protection around a community that still has an opportunity to grow significantly within well-defined boundaries. The city of Livermore, and then finally the city of Watsonville, which has a fairly forward-thinking moratorium on growth, voter-approved, that provides a significant opportunity for everyone to catch their breath, take a stock of what they have, assess and fully calculate the value of a really unique agricultural setting in a climate with soils and other attributes that are unlike any place else in the world. And how the use of strategically placed ag conservation easements will help achieve both agricultural land protection as well as conservation, but also allow for growth in appropriate directions once the moratorium's lifted.
So to recap briefly, where we've been in September 2014, we released draft guidelines which laid out the 3 elements that John described, plus details about the criteria that we will be using to select both for strategy grants and the conservation easements. We did a number of workshops in October. We released draft final guidelines January 9th, which incorporated comments that we received from the workshops and also through public comment. And then we're here today hoping to get approval on these guidelines, which will then allow staff to release a call for proposals tomorrow in order to begin to see what comes in and come before you at your June, July meeting with some recommendations. The applications will be due in March for the strategy grants, March 20th, and we're doing a concept proposal for the easement grants, so the concepts would be due February 6th with full applications in April. And that's a brief look at where we are. If there's any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Questions? Secretary Caballero.
Maybe I missed this in the report, but, and my apology if I did. In terms of the greenhouse gas reductions, is it effectuating an easement, or is it in the management practices in the future? Or exactly how are you going to calculate that? And then how do you determine, in a limited grant situation, who gets what?
Right, so the criteria that is laid out in the guidelines are geared towards collecting information to determine which easements would be most at risk to conversion to non-agricultural uses and most at risk to conversions to intensive development. So we will be looking at that to determine which would be the most appropriate for funding out of this program. And the requirement to report greenhouse gas reductions, we are still looking at the exact model that we want to look. We have staff looking at that now. We'll be working with the Air Resources Board to determine exactly how we will report that. But essentially, we will be looking at what development may have occurred if that land would have been converted to an intensive development scenario, and that would be the avoided greenhouse gas increases.
I'll just add that in addition to the avoided increases, we would also be calculating the existing ability of a particular parcel or set of parcels to sequester carbon. So it's a baseline condition that's additive to the avoided increases, and then as we move into the management practices, that's where we'll get significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions through management.
I guess that brings up the other issue, which is, do you base that based on the type of crop that's grown? And some are more, have a higher sequestration than others, and I'm just wondering where the literature is on that. I just don't know.
Yeah, I think there is emerging science, certainly, that will suggest that different crops emit different levels of greenhouse gases and have different abilities to sequester carbon. There are a certain set of crops in California that on an annual basis likely have a net sequestration potential, while other crops probably are a net discharger of greenhouse gases on an annual basis. So what we would be looking for are those places, those crops, those situations, those management practices that lower the amount of greenhouse gas emitted and improve overall soil carbon sequestration.
Secretary Ross?
I just wanted to add that management practices in particular are something to be looking at. And an example of that, Secretary, would be no-till as a way of significantly reducing greenhouse gas reductions, but it also builds up soil matter, as well as cover cropping are just two examples of management practices themselves, in addition to understanding the crops that you have there already. So this works very well with a soil health initiative that the governor included in his budget. So we'll be working very closely with you because there is a need to really accelerate the research to get quantification of what that really means.
Right.
I'll just point out very briefly, and this is obvious to everyone that works within agriculture in California, that going crop by crop is very important, but we have well over 300 crops being grown in California, and so it's a very difficult and arduous process of developing the necessary calculations associated with each of those crops in each of the climatic regions in which they grow, on the variety and range of soil types and management practices that are occurring. So it's a pretty significant task that no one has really been able to spend the time or effort on. It's going to be slow to actually get there.
Mr. Fisher?
Thank you.
Very formal today.
Sorry, I know who you were talking about. Could you talk a little bit about the efforts you made to integrate this program into the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program so that they work sort of hand in glove? I think we'll get better bang for the buck if we're all sort of pointed in the right direction, same direction.
Yeah, and it is an important comment to make too, because it's really the investments in the individual easements and the planning and the infill housing development, all together that starts creating the kind of changes I think this council is interested in. So we're very aware of that, and I'm also participating on with the other element too. So, without knowing what projects come in, we're certainly working in cooperatively. I think it's been suggested that it somehow marry the two pieces together so that, say, we fund an infill development here and then we would fund an easement on the boundary. Without knowing what projects come forward, we didn't really know how to do that practically for this first round. I think when we see the types of projects that come forward, we'll be able to put more thought into how they might be better matched in that way. But certainly, as far as reaching the overall policy goals, I think just the fact that we're making investments in both the growth boundary lands and infill, that combined we're on the right path.
I mean, if we can figure out a way in successive rounds of funding to be able to marry the transit projects we heard, the land projects we heard, and the affordable housing projects we're going to hear together, I would just encourage, this is why I think this is, this is the first pass at all of these guidelines, and when we start to see the types of things that are going to come in, the more they can be married, the more we'll really be focused. I think set a model for what can happen in state government too.
Secretary Rodriguez.
No, I agree with that last comment. As we get more experience, we'll have a foundation for really making sure that all of these programs are supportive and work together. In response to Secretary Caballero's question as well, I just want to say that the Air Resources Board is committed to working with this program to make sure that we can really identify the greenhouse gas emissions reductions that we achieve through this program. This is one of the smaller programs that we've got using cap and trade funds, and we know that it needs more attention from the Air Board. We have identified where the emissions reduction should come from. As suggested, it's a combination of really preventing sprawl that will lead to more vehicle miles traveled, and instead promoting infill in our existing communities so that development can take better advantage of public transportation, or at least will promote shorter commutes, if you will. Additionally, there are just agricultural practices that will help to retain carbon and reduce carbon emissions, and just preventing the conversion of agricultural or open space lands has benefits as well. But ARB will be working to really quantify those, because we know that at the end of the day, we will be able to, and must be able to demonstrate that greenhouse gas emission reductions have been achieved through these programs.
Secretary Laird.
Yeah, I know we have 18 people that want to comment, and we're starting the discussion beforehand, but since we got into it a little bit, I don't want to leave a couple of things hanging. And I think Bob is exactly right. It would be really nice to figure out the way to link these in the specifics. When we have $5 million for 475 cities and 58 counties, and the housing projects might not link up exactly where the ag is given that breadth, I think we do need the first pass-through to see if there are those opportunities. And I know in my home city, by passing an initiative and winning a federal court case that allowed us to have permanently designated green belts around the whole city, it forced the infill housing issue, where until that happened, people might not have looked at it in the same way. And it's absolutely made it happen. But if we had required them to link the two, it might have held it back a little. So I think it's really important to see where we do this and how they link up, and then see if there's a way to find that.
Okay. Let's thank you guys very much, and stick around. There may be a little more to discuss. I think what I want to do now is to have the public comments, and let me just say there's quite a few people who want to comment, and I suspect that may be true on the next item as well. So if you can please limit your, I'm not going to do a hard stop at 3 minutes, but please limit your comments to 3 minutes. If you go much beyond that, I will ask you to wrap up. And if I can also ask, if somebody has made the same point that you want to make, if you can just say "me too," it would be greatly appreciated. We have received quite a number of written comments and have reviewed those, so I think the council is fairly familiar with a number of the issues. But with that, let me start calling out. I will do my usual, which is to call the speaker and the person on deck. So the first speaker is Karen Burr, followed by Kathy Gaffney.
Ken, and if I might, to
Yes,
that point of
please.
efficiency, and I apologize to everybody in advance. I had a hard stop at 4, I moved it to 4:30. I really have to leave at 4:20 is like the absolute hard stop for me, and I don't know if anybody else has that. I wish I'd brought our timer. At Covered California, we actually do have a 2-minute timer, and it's shockingly effective at efficiency. People really can get their comments in if you really focus on the essence of the comment and trust that we have reviewed the material, which we have all been provided for. So in the spirit of getting to both of these really important subjects, I would just emphasize that some of us will start to leave, and we want very much to be here and participate in this important conversation.
Please.
All right, great. Hi, my name is Karen Burr. I'm the Executive Director for the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts. As you know, the RCDs around the state reduce carbon through providing technical assistance, support, and resources to help landowners make better decisions. We just want to officially register as in support of this program. We think it's really well thought out, it's comprehensive and thoughtful. We, of course, want more money put into it, because I think all of us do. And we also just really want to make sure that you don't lose sight of round 3 and how important round 3 of this program is in putting real carbon sequestration on the ground through land management practices. It is a very large part of the picture, and we want to just make sure that that stays on the radar screen.
Thank you. Karen Gaffney, followed by Renata Brillinger.
Good afternoon, thank you. I'm Karen Gaffney with the Sonoma County Agricultural Preservation and Open Space District, and since 1990, our special district has focused on protecting ag lands, and we're one of the first public agencies to do so using a sales tax model. Our visionary voters have invested hundreds of millions of dollars to protect over $100,000 of working lands and natural areas, and we've calculated using ARB information that over 20 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent have been stored to date. We're very interested, as are our colleagues here today who you'll hear from, in being a test bed or an R&D entity for achieving the SGC's goals. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples on the GHG quantification and reporting front. We're working with TNC on linking climate action with conservation, with local data, tools, and policies to help our local decision makers. That's funded by the Moore Foundation. We recently were awarded $1 million grant from NASA to do countywide LIDAR to document the carbon sequestration potential in working lands and natural areas in Sonoma County. NASA is very interested in expanding this program and exporting their learnings to other counties. We're working with Santa Clara and Santa Cruz on documenting the multiple benefits of working lands and natural areas with funding from Moore, Bechtel, and the Coastal Conservancy, including, of course, climate benefits. As Mr. McCoy just recently noted, we are one of the first counties to be deploying urban footprint as a test bed at the county scale, and we're very excited to work with TNC to integrate conservation more strongly into that scenario building program. We have kind of unprecedented support in Sonoma County for everything I just articulated from our Farm Bureau and our wine grape community. They're very, very interested in this topic, and I'm sure you will be hearing from them. And so in closing, I'd just like to say that we, as well as our other conservation partners here today, are very excited to leverage these funds with local investments plus other state objectives like the water bond. Thank you.
Thank you. Renata Brillinger, followed by John Gamper.
Good afternoon. Renata Brillinger, California Climate and Agriculture Network, or CalCAN. We are a coalition of organic and sustainable agriculture organizations. We're seeking policy tools to support agricultural climate solutions. Mitigation and adaptation tools. I want to start by just commending your leadership and that of your staff. Integrating urban and rural land use, as you have all acknowledged, is a trailblazing effort, and it's going to be much more powerful if that integration can be achieved over time. Just have a couple of data points I wanted to throw out there. One in support of the potential of sequestering carbon on farms and ranches. The IPCC estimates that by the year 2030, North American farms and ranches could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 374 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents annually. That's approximately 80 million cars worth of GHGs. And this program, we believe, can play a critical role in bringing California into that solution set. And then secondly, regarding the sheer act of protecting farmland, regardless of the practices that are used on it, I'm sure you're familiar with the research that was done out of UC Davis a couple of years ago, a case study in Yolo County demonstrating that the average acre of irrigated cropland the average acre of urban land emits 70 times more greenhouse gas emissions than your average irrigated cropland acre, and 100 times more if you consider rangeland as well. So all this by way of pointing to the potential here. Reducing farmland conversion by 40% in California would avoid 1.2 million metric tons of CO2 if we can achieve that goal. I really would like to commend staff for the level of engagement they've had and the listening they've done at all stages of the development of these guidelines. Of all the changes made to the original draft, we're especially pleased to Note that rangelands are now eligible, that the requirement for the maximum distance from spheres of influence was removed, and that the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program now includes language restricting projects that convert ag land. These are all really important developments that are, in our opinion. So as the program implements and rolls out, we have a couple of recommendations for your consideration. We urge you to fund pilot projects earlier than the 2017 timeline on that third phase that Karen spoke to is so important, or Karen Burr spoke to. Rather than waiting till 2017, we would like to see you tee up some pilot projects in 2016. There's a lot to be learned from trying a few things out and figuring out what future funding priorities are going to be important. And several partners here in this room are ready to work with you on that. And secondly, the current level of funding, as you'll hear, I'm sure, over and over again, we'd like to see that increased with more investments in our vulnerable working lands. And we have if we're really going to be serious about achieving that synergistic potential of integrating the urban and rural components here. So we strongly would, for your consideration, put out a 10% minimum allocation out of that total pot of currently proposed at $200 million for fiscal year 2015-16. I have a letter here that I'll give you that has that states that effectively, signed by more than 30
Can I have
organizations.
you wrap up, please?
Certainly ready to do that. Just once again, thank you for the leadership and vision
Thank
on
you.
this.
I suspect if I asked for a show of hands of how many would like more money for their, yeah. Okay. John Gamper, followed by Nicole, looks like Bird.
John
Raise
Gamper,
his
representing
taxes.
the California Farm Bureau Federation. I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. First of all, I want to thank the department and the agency for reaching out to us in the stakeholder process for our comments in the development of these guidelines. They did a great job of putting these together on a Herculean timeline that you guys have imposed, or the Secretary imposed, I think. But we greatly appreciate the speed at which they put this fine program together. We're very supportive. Just want to highlight a couple of things. This is a $5 million program. We'd like to see more, obviously, me too there. $1 million for strategy grants. The linkage to the Williamson Act to encourage counties to continue to fund it is crucial. We think that's an excellent idea, considering the state has decided not to backfill for the subvention program. I was the source of the comment on the two-tiered subvention program, where we could use some money to incentivize greater farmland conservation in the unincorporated area. Otherwise, you're going to see a tremendous explosion of vehicle miles traveled as the development shifts to the unincorporated area and subdivision. We have a program right now that protects 16 million acres of ground in the unincorporated area with limitations on parcelization. This program at $4 million will protect somewhere between 400 and 600 acres. So 16 million in the Williamson Act, 400 to 600 acres in this $4 million slug. So I think that's something you need to think about. Finally, real briefly, limitations on husbandry practices. Agriculture is a very dynamic industry. It changes with the availability of water, with markets. Perpetual grants are by definition forever. So imposing or telling someone how to farm, what to farm forever is problematic for that landowner and future landowners. So we appreciate the compromise that has come together in the guidelines, and we urge their support. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole Bird, followed by Jeff Stump.
Hello, I'm Nicole Bird with Solano Land Trust. I'm the Executive Director. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Solano County, which is fortunate to have a voter-approved initiative that protects farmland and also keeps growth within the cities, similar to what Secretary Laird was talking about, this kind of combination of policy and permanent ag protection together make a really strong smart growth strategy. And if you've ever driven through Solano County, you'll notice that we still have working farms in between our cities, and so it just shows that that's working. In agriculture, we're really fighting death by 1,000 cuts, and I think it's important to remember that we really need to keep a critical mass of agriculture to make sure that we've got the supporting infrastructure that stays in place. An example of this is our sheep farmers, our lamb farmers in Rio Vista have just one processing facility in California. And so when we think about the costs and the carbon footprint associated with having to ship things further off for processing or for other kind of supporting services, that really it's one of these kind of side benefits that have impacts but are very difficult to measure. The matching funds, we haven't heard so much about that, but the funds that the Solana Land Trust has received from the California Farmland Conservation Program have all been matched by federal dollars. So these funds would be really well used. And lastly, I'm on the advisory committee for the Bay Area Open Space Council. So we're a coalition of 65 conservation organizations, public and private, in 10 counties. And I just have been authorized to voice our support of this program. So that's it for me. I will put my hand up for at least using a percentage instead of a flat rate for the allocation, and I very much appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you. Jeff Stump, followed by Catherine Lydon.
Excuse me, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Stump. I'm the Director of Conservation for the Marin Agricultural Land Trust. There's a lot of Me Too's coming from Malt on this. We protected over 47,000 acres of farmland since we were formed in 1984. We've worked with the Department of Conservation CSCP program. We've implemented 10 easement programs. I know there's going to be a lot of demand. One of the metrics I'll share with you that'll demonstrate demand is last year under the Farm Bill, the new NRCS Agricultural Land Easement Program received $27 million worth of applications for a $3 million allocation. So I think you're going to see demand. I know that Malt has a project ready to go. We have a project that I think is going to sequester a lot of carbon in the future. I also sit on the advisory committee with the Marine Carbon Project. Many folks here have heard about our work to look at changes in land management practices on grassland, in particular. Excuse me, I have a cold still. What we're seeing is that by making small changes in agricultural practices, you can sequester great amounts of carbon, something like a ton of carbon per hectare, just by applying compost. We've extended that from a single practice, and now we're looking with NRCS at the multiple practices that farmers know and trust. And then there's about 24 climate beneficial practices on the books today. We're also working with NRCS on a quantification tool, so you can use modeling to figure out how much carbon you can sequester by changing those practices. You can look at comet-planner.com. Secretary Ross, I think, is familiar with that effort. So we're trying to roll out some modeling that's going to show our producers how they can sequester carbon. The other thing that we've really figured out is that this is about soil health. A lot of our atmospheric carbon should be sitting in our soil. And not only is it sequestering carbon, but it's increasing productivity by 50%. And our soils that have more carbon retain about 25% more water. And water is going to be as critical as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So we urge your support. There's a big Me Too on the increased funding, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll note that the governor is pretty interested in the compost sequestration efforts. Okay, Catherine Lydon, followed by Andrea McKenzie.
Hi, I'm Catherine Ledan. I'm the Executive Director of the Brentwood Agricultural Land Trust on the eastern edge of the Bay Area. And East Contra Costa County is exactly the kind of region where a robust agricultural conservation program can stop suburban sprawl and reduce vehicle miles traveled. East Contra Costa County is a place that's experienced tremendous development pressure. The city of Brentwood grew from 7,500 people in 1990 to 53,000 people in 2002, and that all happened on prime farmland. Now, I've worked with BALT for 12 years, and I believe that there are two things that need to happen to protect land on the urban edge. First is strong local land use policy, and the second is strategic agricultural conservation. And so I commend you for designing a program that has both of those components, the planning and the conservation. I want to speak briefly about conservation easements because I believe that conservation easements are tremendously more powerful than people realize. BALT holds 9 conservation easements in East Contra Costa County that total about 1,000 acres. Now, that's only a very small portion of the acreage of prime farmland in East Contra Costa County. But what I want to tell you and really emphasize is that conservation easements are far more powerful than you can really calculate based on acres or that you can see by looking at a map. Because I've worked with those farming families, many of whom have farmed for generations in Brentwood, and over the last 10 years, I've watched a group of farmers who started out very skeptical, slowly but surely step forward and put their land in easement, longtime farming families, and they basically are making a stand about what the future of that agricultural place is. And what I've watched is how that act of putting their land in easement has changed the whole spirit of East Contra Costa County and has changed the community's view of what the future of that place is. And when you make that change, you really put the political climate in place for strong land use policies. So those two things really go strongly together. And when you think about conservation easements, don't think of them as just dots on a map or, scattered acreage, because it's a powerful transformation that a community goes through when people decide to put their land in easement. And so the one last thing I want to say is I want to thank you very much for giving us some flexibility on the 50% matching funds, because the places that have the greatest development pressure are often not the most affluent communities. They're often places like Brentwood, where a very small land trust has little opportunity to raise matching funds. So it's very important for us to have that flexibility. And of course, like everybody else, I'm going to put my vote in for more funding, because I think we have tremendous need. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Andrea McKenzie, followed by Mark Fenstermacher.
Good afternoon, distinguished members of the Strategic Growth Council. I'm Andrea McKenzie. I'm the General Manager of the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority. We're a special district created by the California Legislature 21 years ago to balance growth by conserving open space and agricultural land. And we do that through the purchase of land and conservation easements. A recent study that our Open Space Authority conducted estimated that carbon storage benefit of our county's oak woodlands, grasslands, and forests is the equivalent of taking 750,000 cars off the road each year. However, just in the last 30 years, our county has already lost 50% of our most productive farmland to urban sprawl, and we're projected to lose the remaining land within 20 years. With cities continuing to pursue annexation of thousands of acres of prime farmland outside urban growth boundaries for future development, we risk losing the very gains we envisioned through AB 32 and SB 375 unless we can close this loophole. So in that regard, ensuring the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program will not fund projects that result in the conversion of agricultural land is a very important policy provision. I'd like to support the discussion I just heard regarding integration between Secretary Laird and Mr. Fisher. It's really, really important that we lead this work on strategic planning. You have partners out on the ground with land trusts and open space districts who are passing local funding measures and creating open space plans that support statewide policy objectives of the Strategic Growth Council. We also would strongly suggest you increase the funding for the program, especially the strategic planning. This is really, really important. Our open space district just passed a measure on the November 2014 ballot that is putting these kinds of provisions in place in Santa Clara County. And lastly, we would also urge your implementation of the land management element program as soon as possible. We will be using some of our proceeds from our $120 million parcel tax to incentivize good management practices by private landowners, and look forward very much to partnering with the Strategic Growth Council in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to stipulate that everybody is going to want more money, so you don't need to include that in your comments. So Mark Fenstermacher, followed by Nick Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the council. Mark Fenstermacher here on behalf of the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County and the Peninsula Open Space Trust. Say us too on the funding. Thank you very much for your leadership on the issue, and also thank you for the revisions to the draft guidelines. We were particularly pleased with making pasture and rangelands eligible, and look forward to working with all of you going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See, when you represent two groups, you can be brief.
Nick Garcia, followed by, oh, okay. dropping like flies. All right, Ed Thompson, followed by Daniel O'Connor.
Good afternoon. Sorry I wasn't in the on-deck circle there. I am Ed Thompson.
10 seconds are on.
I'm California Director for American Farmland Trust, a national group that promotes farmland protection. I want to say just a couple things. One is I really want to thank Secretary Laird and his team for their leadership on this issue. We have needed to step up our game in California for a long time. Just to put that in perspective, while states like Pennsylvania and Maryland have been permanently protecting 500,000 acres, we've been protecting 50,000. While they've been investing $6 or $7 per capita per year in these programs, California has been investing 11 cents. So the #1 ag state needs a much more robust approach to this for all of the benefits: food production, habitat, watershed, water underground aquifer recharge, as well as the climate benefits. Second, I want to emphasize what you've been hearing over and over again, this idea that strategies to help control growth and permanently protect farmland go together. It is the hallmark of every truly successful local farmland protection program in this country, to combine those two, including some here in California. So I think I want you to keep in mind the idea that you want to be funding strategies, not just easement purchases. They really need to be an integrated strategy to be effective. Finally, I want you to be the first to have access to a brand new AFT study. And I'll pass these out. I made just enough copies for the council and can get you more of them. That corroborates and reinforces the work that Professor Louise Jackson and her team did at UC Davis. They looked at the differential between greenhouse gas emissions from cropland, or agricultural land in general, and the cities in Yolo County. We took a look at 7 of California's leading crops that comprise about half of all the irrigated acreage in California, about 4 million acres, and compared those emissions with those of 13 cities. And what we found basically corroborates what Jackson and her team did. On average, the urban areas are generating 40 times the greenhouse gases per acre as the crops are. Now, we also found that there's significant variations in these crops, as I think somebody already said. There are also significant variations among the cities. And what is the lesson there? I think it is that you need to be careful not to micromanage this program, to try to calibrate too finely the greenhouse gas emissions from any given transaction. Again, think strategically, think in strategies, think of what can be achieved overall by combining easement purchases and controlling growth. The direction here is very clear, whether it's 70 times or 40 times. It is clear that by saving farmland, preventing unnecessary premature conversion to urban uses, we're going to have a significant impact on greenhouse gases going forward. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, Daniel O'Connor, followed by Michelle Clark.
Daniel O'Connell, American Farmland Trust as well. I'm going to reference the CalCan and American Farmland Trust comment letters, and of course Ed just spoke. And I want to speak to you about the San Joaquin Valley, where I am the program manager for AFT. First of all, I live in Fresno. I work through the region. And I want to start off by saying it's what I'm going to call is an extraordinary geography. We've constructed the world's most productive agricultural region. It's a marvel of technology, it's a marvel of science, and yet this very region of fertility has the highest poverty in the United States. So the world's most productive food-producing region has the highest poverty and the highest hunger, which is associated with poverty. It has the worst air quality in the United States. And it has a number of other environmental justice concerns. So it's a place of paradox where 2 zip codes between the north and south of the city of Fresno have a difference of 20-year life expectancy. This law is going to be greatly beneficial, along with SB 375, to ameliorating and making adjustments to fix these paradoxes. Secretary Laird, Ed just mentioned, land use policy and conservation in a rural region are inexorably linked to urban economic development and will be central to the implementation of California's climate-related legislation under SB 375 and AB 32. I wanted to just let you know that in 2014, we've had extraordinary local and regional movement on policy. So the city of Tulare was the first to get farmland mitigation in the southern part of the region. The city of Visalia a week later followed, and their general plan shrank the sphere of influence, incentivizes infill, and has one-to-one farmland mitigation. About a month later, the city of Fresno, and Secretary Ross was down and encouraged us in the region to form a durable coalition. And we've done that, Secretary Ross. We, as conservationists, have worked with infill developers and the conservation community and environmental community to come together. And if you had been to the meetings at the city of Fresno while we mobilized there was hundreds of people, Hmong, Oaxaqueño, and an assortment of everybody. So I just wanted to say we are doing the work there, and we're able to receive these funds. The second main point regarding this program is that there is land trust support and infrastructures there to do the work. Sequoia Riverlands Trust and the Central Valley Farmland Trust are there. They're regional in scope. They have the expertise, and they can do the work. I'm going to leave you with this. How much longer can we, as a society, how much longer are we as a society going to tolerate the paradoxes and incentivize the promise that presents itself with us as a region in the San Joaquin Valley? A hope is that it is a geography that we constructed, and therefore we can reimagine and make adjustments through policy and investments. I often now, after years being there, think of it as the garden, and it is a garden, and we are going to conserve the most productive place, and we're going to help the people there while doing so. So thank you for this program. I look greatly forward to, I see where this line of policy is going, and it just fills my heart, and we're going to be working down there to implement it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Michelle Clark, followed by Adam Livingston.
Thank you. I'm Michelle Clark. I'm the Executive Director of the YOLO Land Trust. We're here to urge your support of the proposed guidelines. The YOLO Land Trust has a really simple mission: to permanently conserve farmland and rangeland in Yolo County. Over the last 25 years, we've entered into 60 conservation easements, conserving about 11,000 acres of farmland in Yolo County. We annually visit each one of those farms, and we report our compliance to the funding agencies, including the Department of Conservation. We have been very fortunate over the years to partner with the Department of Conservation. They have funded many of our projects, and we've been able to leverage their money with federal money and with a very successful program in the city of Davis. The city has a parcel tax, Measure O, and we use that money in combination. We cannot fund easements on our own. It is impossible. We do not have a pool of money that we can draw upon. We don't have wealthy benefactors in Yolo County, and yet Yolo County is the model for ag land conservation in the state of California. 81% of Yolo County is in farmland and rangeland. It's not a surprise that Dr. Jackson's study was done in Yolo County, and I really encourage you to look at her study. It was mentioned twice so far in the comments, and the title of the study is really key, I think. The study is called Adaptation Strategies for Agricultural Sustainability in Yolo County. Her conclusion was that farmland preservation is needed for greenhouse gas reductions. So I want to thank you again for the opportunity to come and speak. We're all in favor of more money, and thank you also for revising the guidelines to reduce the requirement that it had to be 50%, because with that 50% requirement, we could not have continued to do the successful work that we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam Livingston, followed by Liz O'Donoghue.
Thank you. My name is Adam Livingston. I'm here on behalf of the Southern Sierra Partnership, which is a coalition of business and conservation organizations that includes Audubon, California, the Sierra Business Council, Sequoia Riverlands Trust, Tejon Ranch Conservancy, and the Nature Conservancy. Our member organizations work with farmers and ranchers in the Southern Sierra and Southern San Joaquin Valley, and between them, in just and just that one region have conserved over 276,000 acres of farmland and rangeland. We've also been actively engaged in the development of our region's first sustainable communities strategies. I'd like to echo the comments of some of the other speakers and thank you for your leadership in developing this program, and thank you for incorporating some of our member organizations' feedback, including lifting the 2-mile limit and explicitly extending the program to rangeland. As you've heard from a few other commenters, the conservation of our region's working landscapes plays a direct and essential role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You've heard about the study in Yolo County showing a 70-fold difference between developed land and irrigated farmland, and 100-fold difference between developed land and rangeland. You've heard about a similar study from AFT further supporting that conclusion. And more broadly, as suggested by Secretary Laird, making conservation possible in rural areas helps direct development into existing communities, which is essential if we're going to realize the vision of AB 32 and SB 375. I'd like to say me too, or us too rather, on the more funding issue, but would like to add something there. It's not just that everyone would like more funding. In this case, this is a program that is uniquely positioned to benefit from matching funds. Even if 50% funding isn't necessarily realistic in every circumstance, this is a program that can leverage matching funding from federal sources, potentially other state sources, private sources. That's not necessarily the case with every other program. So in order to scale up the impact of this program and scale up our ability, the ability of the conservation community to leverage matching funding, we do believe that setting a floor of 10% of total SGC program funding starting in the 2015-2016 fiscal year would be an excellent start. Thank you again.
Thank you. Liz O'Donoghue, followed by Nancy Schaefer.
Good afternoon. I'm Liz O'Donoghue. I'm Director of Infrastructure and Land Use for the Nature Conservancy. You've heard a lot today already about how important this program is. It's not only about achieving our climate goals, but the co-benefits that result from ag preservation include wildlife habitat, food security, avoided sprawl, reduced VMT. It's critically important that as this program is implemented, the greenhouse gas emissions reductions are quantified and demonstrated. And I think you'll see that given what the studies have shown. But fundamentally, this is about supporting AB 32, and we just want to emphasize that, and we're confident that that's going to move forward. I want to thank the council, and in particular Secretary Laird, in developing this program. The staff has done a tremendously good job in both putting out draft guidelines and then listening and revising. I do have two comments I want to make. One is on integration, and we've heard this discussion already through Mr. Fisher and Secretary Laird and a number of the members a number of the members of the public who have already spoken. But this program cannot and should not exist in a vacuum. It's really important to protect the natural and working lands in the landscape that also help constrain sprawl, as well as invest in infill development that relieves the pressure on development in the outskirts. And only then, when they work and exist together and coordinate together, do we get the multiple benefits and the reductions achieved through that action. So I really want to stress the importance of integration. I really look forward to working with the council and staff on tangible ways, steps that can be taken to actually integrate the two through coordination, through shared incentives, and I can't stress that enough. Going forward, I think that should be a major element of the council's work in bringing together these two programs as well as the conservation of the natural lands as well. Secondly, me too on growing the program. I think the value is there, the demand is there, and we really look forward to working with all of you to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Schaefer, followed by Chris Maurer.
Hi, I'm Nancy Schaefer with the California Rangeland Trust. We are a nonprofit land trust that works with ranchers who want to voluntarily conserve their ranches using conservation easements. We currently hold and monitor easements on 285,000 acres around the state, and we have a waiting list for another 300,000 acres. So that gives you an idea of the demand. Not a lot I can add to what everyone else has said, but I do appreciate the extensive effort that Department of Conservation staff did to reach out to everyone they could and get comments and to make changes that included rangeland. By including rangeland, it really opens the door to a lot of additional matching funds for the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chris Maurer, followed by Craig Edgerton.
Thank you for this opportunity. Chris Maurer on behalf of the California Council of Land Trusts, which represents more than 150 land trusts in local communities throughout California. Real briefly, we'd like to thank the hard work and thought that's gone into the development of these final guidelines, and in particular, Secretary Laird as well. We think these guidelines are a great start, particularly given the quick timelines involved for them getting developed and for getting this initial tranche of funds out the door as quickly as possible. We think that over the long term, there's going to be a recognition for it's a team effort in terms of all of us staying focused on continuing to develop and execute good strategies and appropriate projects for investing continued cap and trade revenue funds in ways that provide significant and demonstrable impacts on reducing the state's greenhouse gas emissions profile. And towards that end, we look forward to continuing what has been a very wonderful, positive, and productive working relationship with the council and their staff members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Craig Edgerton, followed by Katrina Robinson.
Hi, I'm Craig Edgerton with the Silicon Valley Land Conservancy in Santa Clara County. Being kind of last on the list, everything's been covered, so I won't go over anything except to let you know that the cities of Morgan Hill and Gilroy have tentative plans to put aside about 1,500 acres of ag land in the southern part of Santa Clara County. So when we talk about leveraging funds, we can leverage those not only 50%, but maybe 3 times and 4 times, because there's other programs out there. And I know that your boss, Governor Jerry Brown, has been known to be really conservative with the dollar bill. And I think this is a great way to go back to him and say, we are leveraging this money 3, 4 times. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Katrina Robinson, followed by Carrie Timmer.
And I will be similarly brief since we're at the end here. Good afternoon. Katrina Robinson on behalf of the Carbon Cycling Institute as well as the Marin Carbon Project, which uses a range of land management practices to achieve deep carbon sequestration. This includes compost applications, which I know you had said the governor is interested in.
Yes.
I wanted to second CalCan's comments and several of the other comments, thanking staff and the council for incorporating our comments and other comments into the proposed guidelines, and we will continue to be in strong support of the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, Carrie Timmer, followed by Jeff Roberts.
Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Timmer. I'm the Government Affairs Director for Sierra Business Council and a member of the Southern Sierra Partnership, from whom you heard before. SBC is a regional network of 4,000 rural businesses, local governments, and community leaders that are all working together to enhance the well-being of the Sierra Nevada. I'm here primarily to support the program overall, although we do have a couple of things that we'd like to mention. First and foremost, our thanks go out especially to Secretary Laird for his hard work in developing this program and fighting for it. We appreciate all the positive adjustments that have been made, many of which have been mentioned before, so I won't mention them again. We would very much like to continue working with the Council and with the Air Resources Board to identify clear and generally accepted methodologies for calculating greenhouse gas emission reductions and carbon sequestration benefits, along with the additional co-benefits that come from protecting ag land and other resource lands. Also, we would like to work with the Council to ensure that there is a rural strategy that lets rural areas successfully compete and therefore contribute to and benefit from the achievement of the state's 2020 and the post-2020 emission reduction goals. As has been mentioned before, there are many land trusts in the Sierra who are poised and ready and hopeful and ready to do the hard work that is necessary. Also, as we know, getting to the 80% reduction by 2050, as called for by the governor and others, is going to be an extremely heavy lift. We're very pleased that we seem to be on track for meeting the 2020 reduction goals, but hitting that 80% reduction by 2050 is going to be tough. So we definitely support the commitment of funds going to disadvantaged communities, but we believe that in the long run, investments need to consider disadvantaged people, not just communities, people no matter where they live. As a result, we do request some ongoing review and improvements to the disadvantaged communities calculations and the methodologies used for scoring to ensure that all those affected have the opportunity to participate in and benefit from these visionary reduction efforts. And we don't want any more money, only kidding.
Thanks for that. Jeff Roberts.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, I'm Jeff Roberts. I'm speaking on behalf of Granville Homes in Maricopa Orchards, based in Fresno, California. By way of background, we farm in 6 different counties and actually in 4 different cities in the state. And we really appreciate the ability to participate in this process. And I want to thank Julie and John for the workshop they offered in Bakersfield. We did attend and participate there. And knowing that we farm in many places, we're probably going to be involved in a situation where one or more of those entities applies for a grant. And we would like to participate in that process as well. We think that it might be worthwhile looking at taking some of the funding set aside for easement acquisition and put more toward the initial discussion of planning strategy. And I'm not going to tell you what that magic amount would be, but it would seem if you want to accelerate this program, putting more dollars at the very front end in the planning might make more sense. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak here today, and thank you very much.
Thank you. So with that, I would entertain a motion if someone is so inclined.
I would move the guidelines as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and Secretary Laird would like to comment.
I'm going to try to do this relatively briefly and maybe tie together some of the comments, because it was a great relief of the 18 or 19 people that supported it, that spoke. Everybody supported it. And clearly, a lot of the changes that people had suggested were taken already. And if I could synthesize what I think the testimony was, it was, we support it, do more, do it sooner, was generally what people were saying. And there, I have to confess, there is a moment where I'm thinking, where were you all when I felt like I was the only one trying to get this? But this is a very validating moment and a good moment. First and foremost, this is a greenhouse gas reduction program. And so to the extent that there were problems where people had to make suggested changes, it was how can you be true to that as well as accomplishing the things that everybody was testifying for. And I have to confess, you know, with my grandparents having had a ranch in Sonoma when I was growing up, having worked in Brentwood 20 years before it was 7,500 people, having been raised in Contra Costa County, in Solano County, when Vacaville and Fairfield had about 10% of the people that they have now, it just speaks to the urgency of being effective. And so the other key thing to say to this is the first year. This is the first pass. As Bob Fisher talked about integration, which is one of the things that came up from some of the speakers, I think we have to get this out there. We have to get it rolling. We have to document how it is meeting the goals, but in the process, answer that question about integration. And that's very important. And I think on a policy level, also, with the legislature with the Williamson Act not having received state support in recent years, this does it on both levels. With what is a relatively small amount of money for easements, it deals with the issues that people were talking about in support of easements. With regard to the policy of the local government agencies that are the ones that have been hanging on there with the Williamson Act, it is really an incentive to say, what is it that's top priority? What is it that we should be doing? How do we make sure that is greenhouse gas reduction? But if we look at the next generation of protection of ag land, how do we do that, and how we do that in partnership? So if, as I hope we do in a moment, approve these, this motion and these guidelines, we need all your help in working with the local governments to make sure they apply for the grants and that they are willing to work in this process to do that, because I think that's our next step. And if you notice, the date says that we start tomorrow, January 21st. So I will hope that after everybody gets a good night's sleep, they will work with everybody in the local governments to make sure they apply, they know how this fits with what their goals are as well as ours, and how we make it work. And then next year, hopefully we can look at what success there is and start to figure out how to answer some of the additional questions and refine it. And many people have thanked John and Julie, and I want to reiterate that very much, because there was a lot of work in the trenches. It wasn't always pleasant, and appreciate what it took to get here. And I also want to acknowledge Secretary Ross, because the people in her agency, under her leadership, were very strong partners all the way along in the policy and the practicalities of how to make this work. And this wouldn't be here without her being a full partner all the way. So I want to thank you as well. With that, I think we're ready.
Okay, other comments, discussion? This is a council that wants to get moving. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? We have guidelines for the program. Congratulations, and thank you all very much. Okay, so for members of the council, we're going to keep on going so we get as much of Secretary Dooley's time as we can. If you need to take a break, feel free to do so and come back. All right.